And yeah, they're a little reluctant to sell, but I told them don't worry because their house will sell for a lot of money and they'll be out of there soon. So hi, this is Rochelle with eXp Realty. And for anybody who has bought or sold a house, you may feel like, oh, it's a little bit of pressure. That could be a little bit stressful. It could be pretty intense with all of the documentation that needs to be turned in and all of the different forms that need to be signed because of huge, 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 again, huge item to either buy or sell. And just need to make sure everything is done correctly. But when there is pressure that comes from real estate agents who do not put the needs of their client or their friends first, then this is when problems can arise. And this is based on a true story. I am not putting in anybody's actual name. I'm not putting in the residence of where this property is located. I'm not going to give any specifics. So agent 1 had contacted me stating that they knew of Mr. and Mrs. homeowner who wanted to sell their house. And since agent 1 lived in a different state and agent 1 was not licensed in Minnesota, agent 1 could not represent Mr. and Mrs. homeowner in the transaction to sell their house. And so they found me. So then there were quite a few red flags that were popping up. And when I was talking with agent 1 initially, a red flag was that agent really didn't ask about me as an agent or my experience or how I, handle working with clientele. Agent 1 just said that they found me and it looked like I had a quote-unquote gentle, honest face. Great! I work hard for this, so thank you. But also, when trying to figure out if a referral to an agent is going to be to the right agent or if you should find somebody else, ask about experience and things like that. And this agent didn't ask about any of it. So I go to the property to meet with Mr. and Mrs. homeowner, and a red flag that I had during that time was Mr. homeowner showed zero interest in moving. As in, Mr. homeowner never got out of his recliner, and Mr. homeowner never talked to me until I directly spoke to him. And even if I asked a general question of, for either person to, give me feedback, Mr. homeowner basically was more interested in paying attention to their dogs and had nothing to say. Now, Mr. homeowner was a very nice person. Mrs. homeowner was a very nice person, but they definitely did not seem to be on the same page. They were just kind of all over. So then I was saying that, agent 1 had contacted me, all this and that. So now a big red flag that came up was that Mrs. homeowner said that she and agent 1 used to work together and they became friends, and then they no longer work together, but they stay in touch. Great. But the big red flag, I should say here, is that agent 1 basically had taken the initiative to have Mr. and Mrs. homeowner want to sell their house. So it sounded like Mrs. homeowner had said one day, hey, we think we should move. And agent 1 was like, great, I'll find you an agent. And also when Mr. and Mrs. homeowner lived in their previous house, they thought, we should move. And agent one was like, great, I'll find you an agent to have you move. So I'm getting the feeling that agent one is only in it for the referral fee, which means when an agent contacts another agent to say there's somebody here who wants to buy or sell, then when the transaction closes, then the initial agent, so here agent one, would get a portion of that other agent's commission. And it's done quite often, and it actually is very helpful for people like me, because then I don't have to do the work of finding that client. It's, referred to me. So anyway, it just sounded to me that agent one was just like, hand me over that referral fee. Money, money, money. Here we go. So I'm getting a feeling from Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner of why they want to move, where they plan to move, their time frame, all the good stuff that we like to know. And basically I'm getting feedback that they're saying that they're just the type of people who move often. And there really wasn't a pressing need for them to move. Like, it wasn't, we got a job relocation. It wasn't, we need to downsize. It wasn't, we need to upsize. It wasn't really anything like that. It was basically, we moved here. We realized we didn't like this house. We realized that our family is further away of a drive than what we thought. And we realized this just isn't the house for us. And so then I'm also getting some more feedback as to what Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner do not like about the house. And what I am coming up with was agent one had referred to agent two when Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner were looking to buy the house. So now Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner are telling me all the things that they did not like about agent two. Now, I'm not going to get into details, but I am going to say that there were some things that I was like, oh, that's not ethical at all there, agent two. It was really startling. Like, for example, agent two was the agent who represented the buyer and the seller, so this is a dual agency transaction, which is allowed here in Minnesota. But Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner were saying that they put in an offer, and agent two basically dictated to say the seller will take this and have these, specifics or contingencies, and here's the closing date, and okay, everything should be good to go. Basically, why Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner didn't like the house was they had a bad transaction with agent two. So then Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner move in, and they did a few updates. So now they're thinking, okay, we did a few updates. We think now our house, when we sell this, should be right up here with the price, when in fact it was more like right here based on what the market was doing. And it's really a challenge for me as an agent to talk to sellers to say, well, here's the thing. When you bought the house, it was at the peak of the market when interest rates were super, super low and houses were going like hotcakes. And now, because of that, and because of interest rates going up, that means that housing, it's not going as fast. prices are coming down, and that means that houses are also staying on the market a lot longer than when you were buying. So really, unfortunately, you're pretty much just going to break even with this price. And also, when Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner purchased, they were in the house for less than 2 years before, and then they wanted to sell. So they also had a loan with a very minimal down payment. So now they have this much equity, and then they're in a market that's a lot tougher to sell. So now they really aren't going to get their money back. And I was showing comparables, and I was showing like different houses of how things were looking on the market, and it was a tough conversation. And also the updates that Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner did was basically just routine, maintenance. And they were very proud of, for example, like the chain link fence in their backyard, which is great. But then they hired a surveyor to come out because there was questions about where are the property lines. Well, it turns out that property lines were a messed up situation. I'm not going to go into details. And the chain link fence that was put in did not match up with the property lines. So now the chain link fence, although it was within their boundaries, it did not contain the whole yard. And then Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner did not realize that beyond part of the chain link fence was more of their property, and that area was not kept up. So now that is something that like the next person is going to think, what's going on with this unkempt yard and the chain link fence, and now we have to talk about property lines, and it was going to be a really messy situation. And then when Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner hired the surveyor, then the Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner kind of ran out of money and couldn't continue to pay the surveyor to complete the task of getting the property lines put into place and on the documentation of the legal paperwork. So now there's a lot of questions as to where everything is and who belongs to what and blah, blah, blah. And now we have this house that really isn't going to be able to be listed at the price that they want. And then we're also in a market that the properties are sitting on the market for a minimum of 62 days before they're sold. And Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner are saying, no, we want to move now. And then another red flag, was the area where Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner were looking to move because they didn't have much equity from their current home to use to put toward the down payment, all this and that. Plus their interest rates were significantly higher than their mortgage that they were pre-approved for was not getting them the type of houses that they would find most desirable. So then the question comes up of, okay, what do you want to do? We talked about it. I presented all the comparables. And then they said, okay, let's think about it. So after I left the meeting, I texted Agent 1 to say, we met. Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner wanted to think about it. And Agent 1's response was basically, oh, okay, well, just let me know when you're going to sign the referral sheet and turn it in to me. And yeah, they're a little reluctant to sell, but I told them don't worry because their house will sell for a lot of money, and they'll be out of there soon, and they just need to find an agent to hold their hand. And I was like, what? No, you don't tell people things that you cannot promise and deliver upon that promise. Like, first of all, no agent should ever tell the homeowners, like, oh yeah, your house will sell for a lot of money. No. The market will dictate, the people who come in to look at it, the offers that are, being written will dictate, and the offer that is ultimately accepted will dictate how much that property will be sold for. So just don't promise anything that cannot be proven. And also then several days later, Mrs. Homeowner had contacted me saying, okay, we have decided to go into a different direction, which means they found a different real estate agent. So now we have agent 3. And so agent 3, I don't know what this agent said or what anything about it. So now the house comes on the market. And it is at this really high price that is actually a little bit less than what Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner were hoping for, but it was still quite a bit above what I would recommend. The house just sat there. Didn't move, didn't sell. And then, guess what? Pause for shock. The house didn't sell because the contract was canceled. So Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner are stuck in their house. They have a bad feeling about agent 2, who was the dual agent who sold the house for them. And then they probably have a bad feeling about me. But here's the thing. What about agent 1, who is doing all these referrals and now promising the world to Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner? But you know what? That's because agent 1 was promising things that couldn't be delivered upon. And then it makes me think, hey, what's happening to this friendship between agent 1 and Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner? I mean, are they thinking what you're telling us is not lining up with other people? 2 other people are telling them as far as how their house will sell and whatnot. And now we have these people who, they don't like their house. They have messed up property lines. They have very specific reasons of why they want to be closer and move to be closer to family and other friends and things like that. And at the time of this, I'm creating this video, their house is still under their ownership. This is why agents need to follow the fiduciary duties of, you put the needs of your clients and customers ahead of yourself, for 1. And for 2, you don't make false promises. And 3, this is also why I like to really get to know who I'm working with, whys of moving, what are your expectations, so that way we can come up with a really smooth, very, as seamless as can be transaction, and in the end everybody can be happy. There's one story of why, for people looking to buy or sell real estate, please advocate for yourselves, stand up for yourselves, say, yes, this is what I want, no, I don't want that, because if you don't and you feel pressured, it'll probably backfire. And for other agents, please, 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 also do not feel the need to pressure people. So for any questions, please contact me. My information is below. And you have a great day.